good evening and welcome back to the channel. Tonight we begin with a harrowing true story submitted by a listener named Rizki, detailing his frightening experience trying to find cheap accommodation in Jakarta. This is the story of the room above the graveyard. The yellow neon light of the alley in South Jakarta was less a source of illumination and more a sickly fog. It was late. I was 19, a desperate college freshman from out of town, dragging a beat-up suitcase whose wheels protested loudly on the rough pavement. My single, urgent priority was survival, find the absolute cheapest room. My funds were critically low, enough for 1 month's rent, provided the price was minimal. After 3 relentless days of searching, I found an old wooden sign, Twilight Boarding House. The name was misleading. The building was ancient, damp, and surrounded by a rusted iron fence choked with weeds. It looked like a condemned structure. The moment I stepped into the yard, a heavy, offensive odor hit me. It was a dense mixture of mold, wet earth, and stale incense. I met the landlady, Mrs. Ratna. She had a remarkably placid, almost blank expression. She offered me the last room on the 2nd floor, room 13. "The price is special for this room," she said, her voice flat. 500,000 rupiah, around 32 USD, utilities included. It's usually more. That low price was a siren call. All my financial alarms instantly switched off. But a deeper intuitive sense, a sensitivity I've always possessed, told me something was wrong. As I touched the wooden staircase, a powerful, deep chill washed over me. I smelled the heavy scent of old, undisturbed soil. I knew this place was not empty. When I opened the door to room 13, the cold was immediate and penetrating. The window faced a brick wall, sealing the room in stagnant air. The only furniture was an old iron bed with a lumpy mattress. In the corner, a perpetually damp spot never seemed to dry. I took the room. The logic of a broke student overruled my fear. Mrs. Ratna handed me the rusty key with an unnerving, knowing glint in her eyes. She gave one final instruction. "The shared bathroom is down the hall. Keep quiet." My first night was silent torture. I locked the door and lay on the thin mattress, trying to convince myself the cold piercing my skin was just the night air. It wasn't. It felt like frozen, focused energy. I drifted into a shallow sleep around 1:30 a.m., when the silence was abruptly broken. First whispers, then the clear, bright laughter of small children. It was too cheerful, too loud, and it was right outside my door. I sat up. The rooms around me were vacant. I heard the frantic pitter-patter of tiny feet running and stopping as if they were engaged in an excited game of hide-and-seek. Then a new sound, a heavy, guttural, phlegmy cough, the dry cough of an old man. This sound felt closest, as if he stood directly at my threshold, watching. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I pulled the blanket over my head. I could feel their presence pressing in the hallway. They knew I was listening. The worst moment came when the tiny footsteps stopped right at my window, which faced a solid brick wall. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, persistent knocking on the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut, paralyzed, until the sounds, the children's laughter and the old man's cough, slowly, mercifully, faded back into the silence around 4 a.m. The next morning, exhausted, I sought out Mrs. Ratna in the yard. I pretended to be sensitive to noise. "Mrs. Ratna, about the 2nd floor hallway, are there children or elderly residents here? I heard very loud noises, laughter and coughing until 2 a.m.
She held her gardening shears,
her expression unchanging. "You must be tired, young man. It's an old building. The wind makes noises. We're a very quiet place." She assured me no children lived there. Her flat denial was terrifying. She wasn't just lying, she was part of the secret. Her gaze held a mixture of pity and steel. She was protecting her cheap rent. I knew then I would get no answers from her. The disturbances continued, always focusing on the most vulnerable place, the shared bathroom. One afternoon while I was showering, I heard the heavy, slow, unmistakable sound of feet being dragged. The sound stopped right outside my door. Through the crack at the bottom, I saw the shadow of a pair of extremely old, wrinkled feet covered by a soil-stained sarong. Simultaneously, a wave of pungent odor hit me, a thick smell of incense, floral offerings, and grave dirt. It was the old man. He had come to show himself. I ran out, drenched, but the hall was empty. The smell, however, lingered, cold, heavy, and real. The terror was escalating from sound to presence. My sanity finally broke late one night. I had to use the bathroom. In the narrow, dim stall, I was intensely aware of the silence. My eyes went to the dull, spotted mirror on the wall. As I finished, I saw it in the reflection. Standing directly behind my right shoulder was a pocong, a shroud ghost. It was a repulsive, mud-stained, brown-black sack of cloth. I was frozen. I couldn't turn my head. I could only watch the figure in the glass. The pocong was still. Then began a small, internal squirming motion. My focus locked onto the knot tied above its head. Slowly, deliberately, the knot began to move, as if being loosened by an invisible hand. It was preparing to unveil itself for me. Just as my terror peaked, a second figure appeared in the reflection, emerging from the dark corner by the mop bucket. It was a towering, pale figure, a Kuntilanak, a female spirit with long, dark hair covering its face. It didn't scream. It began to cackle, a high-pitched, cold sound that resonated in the small room. "You saw it! You saw it, Mr. Rizki!" I was trapped between the figures. Losing all control, I let out a choked, desperate scream, forced the door open and ran back to room 13, locking the bolt and collapsing, gasping for breath. The next morning, I didn't go to class. I walked straight to Mr. Haru's coffee stall, 2 blocks away. I asked him directly about the strange noises in the building's history. Mr. Haru's face went grim. He leaned in, his voice low. "Son, that boarding house was built on an old sacred graveyard. When they built the complex, they moved the graves, but the work wasn't clean. Many believe the remains are still buried under the foundation, covered in cement." He continued, "The spirits are the old residents. They are angry. They will never leave. They think that land is still theirs. Your ability to see them only made you their main target." The truth was a heavy blow. I hadn't rented a room. I had rented a space on top of a furious burial ground. Mrs. Ratna had knowingly sold my mental health for cheap rent. My decision was immediate. I was sacrificing the money. The 500,000 rupiah was the price of my escape. I returned to room 13. The room was deathly cold. As I packed my belongings, the old man's voice whispered right next to my ear. "Where are you going? Your home is here now, Rizki." I ignored it. I packed everything, placed the cold, rusty key on the table for Mrs. Ratna, and walked out. I did not look back. I left the boarding house and all the angry spirits trapped beneath its foundation. I had lost the money, but I had saved my sanity. I swore my next room would be normal, crowded, and safe.
My biggest fear would once again be final exams, not a pocong in the mirror.
Our second true story comes from a listener named Ben, detailing a terrifying encounter that occurred while he worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station and convenience store right off Interstate 90. I started working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station and convenience store right off Interstate 90. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. For the most part, it was boring. The store was busy until midnight, but by 1:30 a.m., the place was dead. My routine was simple: clean the coffee station, restock the coolers, and watch the surveillance monitors. The absolute quiet of the time between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. always felt heavy, almost unnatural. One night, around 3:05 a.m., the automatic door chime broke the silence. I immediately looked up at the monitors. A man was walking in. He was tall, slightly heavy-set, wearing a dark blue hoodie and jeans. What was immediately unsettling was that he was wearing gloves, thick, black leather gloves, on a warm summer night. He didn't look like a trucker, and he certainly wasn't dressed for the weather. I stayed behind the counter. The man didn't head for the coffee, the snacks, or the bathroom. He just walked slowly down the center aisle, looking at the ceiling, then the floor. It was a bizarre patrol. I tried to sound professional. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" He stopped and turned his head. His face was in shadow, mostly concealed by the hoodie. He took a few slow steps toward the counter, his eyes fixed on me. "No, I'm just looking," he said. His voice was deep and quiet. He paused, then added, "I know what I'm looking for." He walked back to the center aisle, stopping right between the magazine rack and the chip display. He stood there, completely motionless, for what felt like 5 minutes. I didn't dare look away from the monitor screen, which showed a tight close-up of him in aisle 3. I picked up the landline phone ready to dial 911, but I couldn't rationalize the call. He hadn't threatened me. He was just standing still. Suddenly, the man began to whistle. It wasn't a cheerful tune. It was a repetitive, tuneless, low whistle, like a sound you'd hear in a deserted tunnel. It was unnerving because the sound was quiet enough that the motion sensor lights didn't pick it up, meaning he wasn't moving. After another minute of the low, haunting whistle, he moved. He didn't walk toward the counter. He walked toward the employee-only door at the back, where the stockroom and the emergency exit were. I felt a cold panic. Is he planning an armed robbery? I jumped up and quickly locked the counter door. "Sir, that door is for employees only," I called out, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He stopped, his hand just inches from the handle of the stockroom door. He slowly turned his head back to face me. The dark shadows still obscured his eyes, but I knew he was looking directly at me. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He raised his gloved hand and gently, almost delicately, tapped his wrist, as if checking a watch. "It's almost 3:30 a.m., he stated, his voice still low. That's when the cameras stopped working for exactly 3 minutes. I froze. I knew, vaguely, that the old analog system sometimes glitched, but no one was supposed to know the exact time. He stood there, waiting. I dove under the counter and hit the silent panic button. Before the alarm could even register, I heard the back door open. He didn't rush. The door creaked open slowly, then slammed shut. He was gone. The police showed up 15 minutes later, finding no sign of him. They checked the old surveillance logs. At 3:28 a.m., the system cut out for 3 minutes, exactly as the man had implied. The camera showed him walking calmly through the back exit at 3:28 a.m., carrying nothing. He wasn't there to steal money or goods. He was there to send a message. He wanted me to know that he knew exactly when and where I was vulnerable. I quit that night. I still have no idea who that man was or how he knew the exact timing of the system failure. Our final story for tonight comes from Clara, who experienced a terrifying stalking incident after a simple trip into the deep wilderness to visit a remote family cabin. Every summer, my family and I drive several hours out of the city to stay at a small, remote cabin deep in the redwood forest. It's disconnected, no Wi-Fi, spotty cell service, and the nearest neighbors are miles away. It's quiet and safe, or so I always believed. The first 3 days were peaceful. My husband, Mark, and I were completely alone. On the fourth evening, around 8 p.m., after the sun had completely set, I was sitting on the porch when my phone briefly flashed, 1 bar of signal. I quickly pulled it out to check messages before the signal died. It was a text message from an unknown number. It simply read, "You shouldn't have brought the red blanket." I was instantly chilled. I looked around the pitch-black woods surrounding the cabin. My red plaid blanket was draped over the railing of the porch right next to me. I showed the message to Mark. He immediately dismissed it. "It's an automated spam text. They got the number from the town registry. It's a total coincidence." He told me to delete it and forget it. I tried, but the next day, the paranoia set in. I kept looking at the dense woods, the dark, tangled undergrowth. I checked the windows constantly. That night, the chilling encounter escalated. I was in bed around midnight when I heard a distinct sound from outside, a gentle, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't the wind or a branch. It sounded like a small, hard object hitting the outside of the wooden wall just below our bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. I nudged Mark awake. "Did you hear that?" He listened for a second, then grumbled, "It's a squirrel, Clara. Go to sleep." I got out of bed, carefully walked to the window, and pulled the curtain aside. It was completely dark. I could see nothing but the black outline of the massive redwood trees. I dropped the curtain and went back to bed, but the tapping immediately started again, slightly faster this time. Tap, 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 tap. Suddenly, Mark sat bolt upright. "Okay, I hear it now. That's not a squirrel." He grabbed his flashlight and, against my frantic protests, walked out the front door. I ran to the window, watching his light pierce the woods. He scanned the ground directly below the bedroom. He paused, lowering the light. He came back inside a minute later, his face pale and tight. "What was it, Mark? What did you see?" I demanded. He slowly walked over to the closet, pulled out his backpack, and began stuffing clothes inside. "We're leaving, now." "Tell me what you saw." Mark finally looked at me. Under the window, someone cleared away the pine needles and dirt. I waited for the rest, and they lined up 6 small, smooth, white stones on the ground, he whispered. They were arranged in a perfect straight line, right where the tapping was coming from. We grabbed only our keys and phones and drove out of the woods as fast as the dirt road would allow us. We didn't stop until we hit the highway. It wasn't until we were safely back in the city that Mark received a text message from the same unknown number. It came in at 4:30 a.m. The message was one single word: waiting. To this day, we never returned to that cabin. We sold it immediately. We still don't know who was in the woods or why they left those 6 white stones. We only know they were watching, they were patient, and they were waiting for us to leave so they could return to the woods. These stories prove that sometimes the true horror isn't the ghost, it's the living person who knows where you sleep. If you have a terrifying true story you want to share, please submit it to the channel. Until next time, stay safe.